This lecture is going to address the first portion of the lecture on the brain. This lecture will be originally carried out on Tuesday, October 13th. Now, in the brain, we can talk about a lot of different structures, and that's what we're going to be discussing today and the second portion of the lecture as well. When we start talking about the brain, we want to start talking about the older brain structures. Now, when we refer to older brain structures, we're talking about the brain structures that are older evolutionarily speaking. So it's not like when a child is developing in the womb after a mother gets pregnant, that these are the things that grow first. No, the entire brain grows at the same time. But when species on this planet started as from a single cell organism to a multicellular organism to advanced level species, eventually they had to evolve the brain, including each individual portion. The older brain structures are the portions that evolved first. The oldest part of the brain is located in the hindbrain, which would be the back third of the brain. And most of the hindbrain is devoted to things that are necessary for survival. The brainstem is the oldest, evolutionarily speaking, part of the brain that species on this planet have developed. The brainstem is made up of two distinct parts, the medulla and the pons. The medulla is instrumental in regulating both our circulation of blood and the respiration of air, or if you want to be very simple about it, heartbeat and breathing. Without that, obviously, we wouldn't survive. The pons, located directly above it, is connected to basic movement, mostly movement within our face, which would be necessary for survival because without movement in our face, we're not going to be able to eat, or species won't be able to eat. So you can see that these two original ones, two early parts of the brain, were really instrumental within survival itself. Directly above the pons is the reticular formation. The reticular formation is associated with waking up and going to sleep. In the 1940s, there was a French and Italian researcher who put an electrode and attached it to the reticular formation of a cat. They then gave the cat sedatives or drugs to knock it out and stimulated its reticular formation, and instantly the cat's eyes popped open and it jumped about 5 feet in the air. Afterwards, they wanted to see what would happen if they severed the reticular formation from the rest of the brain, and the cat instantly went into a coma. So we know that the reticular formation is associated with our sleep-wake cycle, our being alert and aroused, and are kind of like our wake up and go to sleep type feelings. Next to the reticular formation on either side is the cerebellum. The cerebellum is instrumental for a couple of reasons. The big one is that it controls our coordinated movement and balance. So this can be large-scale coordination, like the coordination of the arms and the legs. It can also be coordination of the coordination of our fine motor skills as well, including our fingers. The cerebellum is also instrumental in storing the memories of things that involve coordinated movements, like a lot of muscle memory on how to walk, how to balance, how to ride a bike, how to play soccer, like you see David Beckham here, would all be stored within the cerebellum. Once we leave the hindbrain, we can move into the midbrain. The midbrain is made up of three distinct parts with one kind of subpart attached to it. This midbrain, or the part directly in the center of the brain, is referred to as the limbic system, and it is the emotional center of our brain. The limbic system is made up of three primary parts. First, we have the hippocampus. The hippocampus is associated with memory, factual memory, like remembering your phone number or your street address, but also associated with episodic memory, or memories of those episodes in our events or those events that we experience. Now, because we have an emotional context to those events, it makes sense that the hippocampus is part of the limbic system, this emotional center to our brain. Located within the hippocampus, or right below the hippocampus, is the amygdala. The amygdala is most known for our controlling of emotions. It's where we experience and feel the emotions. Now, positive emotions also have an additional piece, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. But the amygdala is really centered around negative emotions like rage and fear and jealousy. Positive emotions, while we do feel it in there, certainly have an additional part that is not experienced in the amygdala. The additional part that's experienced is in the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus has a couple of different functions. And the hypothalamus first serves as our brain's reward center. So whenever we feel good about something, we get that warm and fuzzy feeling inside, our brain's reward center is activated. Uh, this is where we also feel positive emotions, because when we feel it with the amygdala, we also feel good about feeling it, which is where we experience it in the reward center of the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is reward center is important because it also plays a pretty big role in addiction. The picture that you see below is of a rat with an electrode attached to its hypothalamus. Now, initially, these researchers put the rat on one side of this electrified grid and put food on the other. And the rat would not, after realizing that it's going to shock itself, the rat would not cross the grid to get the food. However, when put next to the pedal and it discovered that pressing the pedal will activate its reward centers within its brain, the rat continually, time over time, intentionally hurt itself in order to get to the pedal to stimulate its reward centers. This is the same thing that is occurring in the brain when people take psychoactive drugs, for example. Even knowing full well that it's doing damage to their body, that feeling to their reward center is so important and so necessary that they're willing to hurt themselves to get it. The hypothalamus also does a couple of other things. It controls our body's state of homeostasis. Homeostasis is our state of internal balance. And internal balance is really important because obviously we don't want to get too asleep or too awake or too hungry or too full or too thirsty or too satiated or whatever. The hypothalamus keeps us in balance. And the way that it does this is by controlling the endocrine system, our system that involves hormones. And the way that it does that is that it is literally connected to the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland, which is the master gland of the endocrine system, is literally physically attached to the hypothalamus. And so when the hypothalamus needs to maintain homeostasis, it will send a signal to the pituitary gland so it can release its hormones and instruct the other glands of the body to help the body maintain the balance that's necessary. Finally, the last one today will be in the forebrain. Now, I know it still looks like it's in the center, but the forebrain is considered all the areas that are in the front or kind of outer layer of the brain. And the one that we're going to cover today, and we'll cover the rest of them in the next part of the lecture, is the thalamus. The thalamus is the brain's message center. Whenever the brain receives signals from the body, those signals go to the thalamus first. Then the thalamus sends it to its proper spot within the brain. Whenever the brain needs to send a signal out to either organs or muscles or things like that, the signal gets sent first to the thalamus and then out to those different areas of the body that need those signals. The best way of thinking about a thalamus is like thinking about a train station. In a train station, trains from all over the land go to the station, and then the station reroutes them to their next locations. The thalamus is the brain's train station, in that it collects all the messages and diverts them and sends them to its proper spots. This is where we're going to stop for the first day. And in the second part of the lecture, we will look at the newer or more advanced and evolved brain structures.